All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Manly Hoops podcast, where we're covering some preseason national awards. If you are enjoying the content, please make sure to like and subscribe. We appreciate all the support. But we're going to kick things off with the Player of the Year. Marcus, who's your pick for the Player of the Year this year?
Yeah, to me, this was kind of an easy selection. I went with Braden Smith at Purdue. I think he's going to be, the best guard in the country. He's going to be the engine that is Purdue, and obviously Purdue starting the season at number one in the country. They're going to have one of the best offenses in the country. He's going to probably average close to 10 assists again. I mean, he was 9 last year, 16 points. He's just great, and he's going to be the head of, of one of the best offenses in the country. So to me, this was pretty obvious with just how good he is at organizing this team, how great of a passer he is. This was obvious in my opinion.
Cody, do you share the same thoughts, Braden Smith, or did you go a different route?
It may have been obvious to you, but I'm actually going to go in a different route here. I mean, if I had to pick one guy, I probably would have gone with Braden Smith. I just have like some underlying concerns with Purdue, particularly like on the defensive end. And like, I think they're pretty much guaranteed to be a top 3 seed. And like, that is essentially a requirement if you want to be the national player of the year. Is like, you need to be like a really, really good player on one of the best teams in the country. I think that's like a pretty obvious thing, but I went with JT Toppin from Texas Tech, and I'll make my case. Maybe they don't have as good of a chance to be a top 3 seed as Purdue does, but I am much higher on this offense. And, when you look at his numbers from last season, he averaged 18.2 points per game, 9.4 rebounds per game. And that was in just 27 minutes of action per game. Like you look at his early season minutes share, and he was only playing like 24 to 25 minutes a game. He was almost like splitting time in the front court with Federico. But when it was his time to play a bunch of minutes late in the season, he consistently got over 30 minutes a game. Some games he wouldn't even come off the floor really. He averaged 21 points per game after February. Actually, averaged 22 points per game after February 12th. And I think this is an offense that he's going to have a lot more opportunity in. With Darian Williams out the door, obviously there are some other pieces that are going to play bigger roles this year, and Christian Anderson and Lawan Watts as initiators. But JT Toppin is such a versatile offensive player. He may not have that elite perimeter game, but it is getting better each and every year. He went 18 for 55 from 3 last year, but his ability in post up, his ability as a short roll creator is among the best that I've seen in the country. And I just think with more usage and more minutes, I think there's a real opportunity for him to average like a 20-point double-double. And at that point, it's going to be pretty difficult to not give him the award if they're a top 3 seed.
I thought you were going to say Diabate for a second there. Not going to lie.
No, I almost got there.
Later in the program, we'll get to that. But Marcus, who do you got for the All-American first team?
Yeah, so second was JT Toppin for me. He's going to be great. Like Cody said, he's going to put up big numbers. I also, to round out the first team, I went with Yaxel Lendeborg at Michigan, Otega Owe at Kentucky. I went with Owe to win SEC Player of the Year, and because of that, I think that puts him right here. He's going to be, in my opinion, the winner of the Player of the Year in the best league. So it's hard to leave him off first team All-American. And then I went with a freshman here to round it out, and Darren Peterson at Kansas, a guy that he's just going to have so much responsibility. He's going to have the ball in his hands a ton. He's going to put up big numbers at Kansas. So I'm really, really excited to see what his freshman season looks like, his only season in college basketball. It should be a lot of fun to watch, and I expect big things.
Cody, who do you got for All-American first team?
Yeah, some similarities in there. I obviously have Braden Smith on mine. Did you had Cam Boozer on yours?
No, I didn't.
Okay, you did. Okay, so I actually went with with Cam Boozer here as well. I think he can put up like JT Toppin like production. I think a lot of offense is going to go through the front court, and Cam Boozer is going to be the head of that snake. Whether it's like he has a very not similar play style, but I just think they're going to do a lot of the same things. He's going to have the ball in his hands, attacking downhill. He can work through the post. He has a more of a perimeter game than a guy like JT Toppin. So, and the fact that the on-ball creation of Duke's backcourt is a little bit of a concern. I see a ton of the offensive actions going through Boozer. I think he's a guy that can average 3 to 3.5 assists to go along with like an 18-point double-double. So I do think he's another guy that I would have here. And then I went with my SEC Player of the Year in Jacoby Gillespie over Owe. It was a tough decision for me in both the SEC Player of the Year and to put them on this list as a first team All-American. But I've mentioned him a ton. I think just he brings a different dimension to that Tennessee backcourt than they've seen in past years. He's going to be a great 3-level scorer, great pick and roll operator that is going to be able to create advantages for a Tennessee offense that has some other lacking pieces for, off-ball players or secondary action players. So I think he's going to have to do a ton for that group. And then my final guy was Darren Peterson. I just think he's probably the best scorer in the country, or the most talented scorer in the country. I think it's between him and a guy like AJ DeBansa. But ultimately, I think Peterson's game is a little bit more polished at this point in time, and he's probably going to be manning point guard duties for Kansas for a decent amount of games. So I think he's a guy that can average. He can be like a 20 and 4.5 assists per game guy.
All right, let's move along to the All-American second team. Marcus, who do you got?
Yeah, I went with Jacoby Gillespie as the first guy on my second team. Like Cody said, it was really hard for me to decide in the SEC who won it, but ultimately went with Owe. I also have Cam Boozer here. To me, it was really tough to decide on guys between the first and second team, especially at the top. With those two guys that were first on my second team. Then I went with Britton Smith's running mate, Trey Kaufman-Renn. I know there are concerns there, with him playing the 4 a little bit more, but I still think he's going to be able to put up pretty big numbers. Then I went AJ DeBansa at BYU. He, like Cody said, he's a great scorer, not as well-rounded as Darren Peterson, but I still think he's going to put up big numbers in a really good offense for Kevin Young at BYU. And then the last guy I went with here for his impact on both ends of the floor, my Big East Player of the Year prediction, Zuby Ejiofor at St. John's. I think he's going to be fantastic on the defensive end. They're going to play through him more on the offensive end. I think he's got a real chance to put up some pretty big numbers this year and be a really versatile piece for Rick Pitino at St. John's.
All right, Cody, who do you got?
Yeah, a few differences here, but obviously I went with Owe as a guy on my second team, Trey Kaufman-Renn as well. People are a little bit concerned with him moving down to the 4. I don't think it's really an issue for the offensive end. He didn't look all that great against Kentucky in the exhibition, but at the end of the day, it's an exhibition. Who cares? He was getting all the same shots that he normally gets, and those shots are going to fall consistently all year long. So he's going to be fine. He's going to be a guy that can average 20 points a game again this season with Braden Smith as his pick and roll mate. I went with the Axel Lendeborg on my second team. You had him on your first team. I think he's going to be awesome, and I think he's going to be in the running for National Player of the Year as well. He's going to have a lot of responsibility on his plate inside and outside with his game. So I think he's going to be awesome this year regardless. And the two guys that haven't been mentioned yet, I went with Milo Suzan from Houston. He's going to see a usage bump as well. He's going to be on the ball a lot more than he was a year ago. And I'm just very high on him as a two-way player. His perimeter game really came along last season. He shot at 40% from 3, and he took care of the ball at a much higher level. And Kelvin Sampson point guards have a lot of responsibility on their plate, and maybe he won't put up the same counting stats as some of these other guys on the first and second teams are going to, but he's one of the most important players to his team in the country. So ultimately I went with Uzan on my second team. And then the final guy is a guy that I've been high on throughout this entire off season throughout the transfer portal cycle. I know he wasn't really a transfer, but it's Bennett Sturts, who's going to Iowa this season from Drake. I mean, it's a guy that averaged 19 points a game on super high efficiency with the amount of usage that he had and the talent that he was playing around. Like the numbers he was able to put up were pretty ridiculous. And now he's going to have a really solid pick and roll mate, pick and pop guy in Alvaro Folgueras by his side to open up his game a little bit more. You know, I can see him putting up the same level of production on similar efficiency and carrying this Iowa team into like maybe top 4 or 5 seed range. So I'm very high on them. I'm very high on them as a team, but I'm particularly high on him as a player.
All right, Marcus, who do you got for the defensive player of the year?
I'm going to throw my third team out there first. I went with Bennett Sturts on that team as well. Milos Uzan. I went with LeBaron Phelan at Alabama, and then Tommy Haug and Ryan Conwell at Louisville. I think a Louisville team that's going to be really good. I think that there's got to be, in my eyes, I feel like there has to be someone that has a chance to make it. And to me, like Ryan Conwell can be that guy. It really pained me because there are 2 names that I really wanted to throw on third team that are kind of like guys that I've been on, in particular Nick Martinelli from last year. He's going to put up big numbers at Northwestern, but the team performance just won't be there. Then another guy in Darian Williams at NC State, I strongly considered for third team as well. I went back and forth quite a bit here, but that's my third team.
Cody, I'll have you throw yours out there real quick.
Yeah, I'll just toss the names out here real quick. I also have LeBaron Phelan, just super high on the usage that he's going to get, and a year 2 leap is in store for him. I put AJ DeBansa on my third team over second team. He's a professional scorer, I can tell you that. It's just a matter of how well he's going to be able to play within a college offense for an entire season is my slight concern. But at the end of the day, if you're on one of these teams, it means you were a fantastic college player for the entire season. I went with Zuby Ejiofor as well, who you had on your second team. I think he's a phenomenal 2-way player, and he's one of the most important players to his team in the country. And the one thing that fascinates me about him is his ability to stay on the floor for as long as he can in like such a physical defensive scheme. Like he was able to play like 75% of St. John's minutes last season. Like he can stay out of foul trouble while being a great shot blocker and rebounder. It's rather impressive. So he's going to be awesome. Then the final 2 guys, I went with Nate Biddle at Oregon. Just I think one of the most underrated players in the country. He has been for his entire career. It's just been a matter of him staying healthy, and he's going to have more offensive responsibility than he's ever had in his college career. So I think he's going to have a big season. Then the final guy I went with is Tommy Haug from Florida. I was actually kind of surprised going through these teams that I hadn't had a Florida player in these awards yet. I think there are so many candidates that you could throw on second or third team. It's just those guys just missed the cut for me. But I think Tommy Haug is going to have way more minutes than he had a year ago. He averaged 24 minutes a game. I think there's a real opportunity he can average over 30. He's going to start at the 3 this year, but when a guy like Alex Condon slides up to the 5, they're going to ask Tommy Haug to slide up to the 4, and it just feels like every lineup combination that could be thrown together has Tommy Haug in the mix, and I think his game is expanding every year as well, as a shooter, as a driver, as a handler, really in all aspects. So I think I'm pretty high on him to have a big year.
All right, now let's do defensive player of the year. Marcus, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I went with who I've continued to kind of go to through the defensive player of the year, at least in their conference, and talk about the best defensive team in the country in Houston. I went with JoJo Tugler, who only played half the minutes last year, but when he's on the floor, he's as dynamic a defender as you can have. Great rim protector. He's at 6'8" with some of the longest arms I've seen. He's like a 7. He plays like he's like a 7'3" big man, but he's only 6'8". He just has the ability to impact the game in so many ways on the defensive end, and really raises that ceiling of the Houston defense a ton when he's on the floor. So to me, I think he's the best defender in the country when he's on the floor, and I think we're going to see him hopefully play a little bit more this year. I know he's dealt with like foul trouble issues but hopefully that can get reined in a little bit and he can play, somewhere closer to, I don't know, even maybe like 27 or 28 minutes a game. And, he wins this award.
Cody, did you go with Tugler as well, or?
I did not. I didn't have him as my Big 12 defensive player of the year because of this reason, like his inability to stay on the floor for any longer than 21 or 22 minutes that he was getting a year ago. When he does play, I do think he is the best defender in the country. I think he, like you mentioned, the wingspan is just ridiculous. He's 6'7", but plays like he's taller than 7 feet. It's just, that's kind of ridiculous to see him out there on the floor, all the things that he can do. But the guy I went with Tamin Lipsey. I went with the guy that I went with as the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. Last year had a bit of a down year on this end because he was dealing with injuries really the entire season. He's coming into this year with a little bit of a knee problem, but it does seem like he's going to be good to go for the season opener. So I'm going to assume he's 100%. And he's really the engine of this defense that has always been top 3 to 5 in the country. And the responsibility he takes on when it comes to, just playing in this scheme, guarding multiple positions, and then taking away the point guard of every opposing offense is special. And I just think his wide frame and lateral movement and just his knack on the defensive end, I think, is going to make him my Defensive Player of the Year.
All right, then we're going to my favorite award, the Nick Martinelli Breakout Player of the Year. Marcus, who do you got?
Yeah, I'm going to keep riding the wave that I've been on all year. I'm going with a Marquette guy in Zayd Lowry that I've continued to kind of say his breakouts here. I think, like we've talked about with Marquette, they develop from within and they bring in freshmen. And, it's his chance now, I think, to take on a bigger role because they didn't bring anyone in the portal. So, if he developed this offseason, which I think, based on what we saw from him in flashes last year, I think if he did, he has a real chance to, make quite a leap this year and average somewhere in that low double digits, 11, 12 points a game, and be a real difference maker for Marquette. So I went with Zayd Lowry. Last year I was on Nick Martinelli from the beginning and it worked out. So I'm hoping that Zayd Lowry can keep my streak alive here.
Yeah, hopefully you can go 2 for 2 here. Cody, who do you got for the breakout player?
I went with a guy that was kind of just stuck behind a center, and it was at Kansas and Hunter Dickinson. I'm going with Floyd Badunga as my breakout player of the year. We may not see it with the counting stats. Like we may not see him average 15 and 10 rebounds a game or anything like that. But I loved what I saw from him last year in the 16 minutes per game that he was getting. Only averaged 6 points and still was able to average 5 rebounds in that amount of time. But I think he's going to be the anchor of one of the best defensive teams in the country. I think this is a Kansas defense that can finish within the top 5. And I do think Badunga's offensive game made real strides as the year went on as a role man. And he was a guy that you could give the ball to in the post, and he was able to power his way through so not smaller big men, but he could kind of punch up in weight. So I was pretty impressed with what I saw. He's a great role man. I think he's going to be great for this transition offense as well. So yeah, I went with Floyd Badunga.
All right, who's the coach of the year? Marcus, who do you got?
Same coach as I said in the SEC award show. I think it's Mark Pope with the additions he made this offseason, especially once Jaden Quaintance is back. He's going to really elevate this team on both ends of the floor, but particularly on the defensive end, his versatility and ability to protect the rim. And then bringing in like Jalen Lowe, you got Owe back. You've got more variety on the offensive end where it's not just 3-point shooting and that's it, right? We've talked about how it's more well balanced, and I think Mark Pope has a chance to finally get Kentucky back to the promised land this year.
Cody, what do you think?
I am in agreement. I went with Mark Pope. I'll take this time just to mention a couple other guys, like not sleepers, but I think guys that are probably in like the next tier. And I think their rival school in Louisville can have the coach of the year, and Pat Kelsey. The emergence that they had in year one, the revival of that program that Kelsey was able to give them in year one, puts them into the conversation to win the ACC and potentially make a run into the Final Four. So I do think he needs to be in the conversation. Kevin Young at BYU as well, I think deserves a shot to be involved here. And then a few, like, I think these ones are more of the true sleepers. I think Ryan Odom can win this at Virginia. You know, their offense is going to be awesome. It's just a matter of what those European transfers look like. I think those guys are two of the bigger swing pieces in the entire country. I'm personally a little higher on them than some of the other European transfers that came in. Nobody's really talking about those two guys, and Thijs de Ritter and Johan Grunlo, all that much. So if those guys emerge, Virginia is going to be a really good team. And then one final one is, you know, I mentioned Iowa being, you know, a team that could potentially be a 4 or 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. And if they can get themselves into that range, I think Ben McCollum can be the national coach of the year. He's won everywhere he's gone. He's continued to prove everyone wrong. He proved everyone wrong at Drake last year, brought them into the tournament, almost made a Sweet 16. So yeah, until he starts losing, I'm not going to doubt him.
All right, and then that leads me to pretty much my last question: who wins the national title? Who's your pick, Marcus?
Before we do, I just wanted to throw out my top transfer and freshman of the year. I think freshman of the year we've kind of already hit on quite a bit. Darren Peterson, going to be, you know, between both of us, a first-team All-American. So, you know, he's going to be fantastic, I think, from night one for Bill Self at Kansas. And then top transfer, I went with Jacoby Gillespie at Tennessee. You know, I think he's going to be you know, just a great addition to that offense as a guy that can really control the offense and make shots, right? They didn't have that in Zakai Ziegler really as a consistent shot maker. Now they have that in Jacoby Gillespie. So I'm really excited to see what he brings to that Tennessee offense.
All right, Cody, real quick, who's your top transfer and freshman?
I went with Gillespie. Same reasons, mentioned him a few times already, but my national freshman of the year was Cam Boozer. Mentioned some stuff about him earlier about how, you know, the offense is really going to run through him. He's a great two-way player, great two-way rebounder, and it was very close between Boozer and Peterson for me. I think they're going to be very important pieces of their team, but ultimately I decided to go with Cam Boozer.
All right. Now who's winning it all? I got a little ahead of myself there, but Marcus, who you got?
Yeah, so my Final Four I'll start with. My Final Four, I have Houston, Purdue, Kentucky, and UConn. I've been riding the UConn train with the additions they've made. I know, like, Braylon Mullins is now out for 6 weeks, but he'll be back, obviously, in plenty of time. Sounds like an ankle injury for him, but, you know, they'll be as good a team as any. Obviously, there's a little bit of a question mark in the front court around, like, you know, can Taris Reed stay on the floor? And if he can't, what do they do defensively in the front court? So, you know, we'll see with that, but I'm very high on this team, and, you know, as well coached as they are, they can certainly make the Final Four. And I went, as I've said all offseason, I went with Kelvin Sampson to finally get over the hurdle and win the national title. I think Houston gets it done, and they will say they take down Kentucky in the national championship.
All
right, Cody, who do you got?
I have the same national championship game, I will say, but I'll talk about the other two teams that I had here. I went with Duke instead of Purdue. I think, I don't know, for some reason, I think Duke's getting a little bit overlooked, even though they were so good last year. I just think people are a little bit too down on what this offense is going to look like. I think people are down on what the backcourt creation looks like, but I think everyone doesn't realize how good Cam Boozer and Pat Gungba are going to be, like, as initiators in this offense, like being able to invert the floor, being able to do a lot of things as, like, dribble handoff operators, and everyone around them can really shoot the ball. So I see this offense as one that can be in the top 3 again. And then obviously they have great defensive personnel. They have great athletes, and two guys that haven't been mentioned all that much throughout the offseason, like Dame Sarr and Malik Brown, who we haven't seen play in, like, exhibition action. If he stays healthy, he's one of the best defenders in the country. So they have a lot of optionality, a lot of depth, and a ton of shooting. So I went with Duke as one of my Final Four teams. And then the other one that hasn't been mentioned is Texas Tech. I think this is a team that was so close last season to getting there. Ultimately, they probably should have been that last team to get into the Final Four. I think they can they can get their revenge here this season. And, I think the offense can hum just like it did last year. They finished in the top 5, and that was with JT Toppin only getting 60% of the minutes. If he can stay on the floor for 75 to 80%, I think this is an offense that can realistically have top 3 upside. So, and there's breakout guys in Christian Anderson and Lawan Watts, and then those off-ball shooters are obviously awesome. So they're going to be great. I guess that was like, I don't know if you like put my back to the wall, like would I pick Texas Tech to go there over some of these other teams? Probably not, but I will just throw that one in there as more of a, I guess, a sleeper if you want to say. But yeah, my national champion was Kentucky and Houston, but I went in the other direction. I actually went with Kentucky. This is the team that I've been banging the drum for all off season. And now I would hate to see Kelvin Sampson lose back-to-back national championship games, but I think if it got to this point, even though I picked Kentucky, I would still be cheering for Houston just to finally get over the top, because it's something that this program deserves.
All right, then before we wrap things up, do we have a bold prediction on the season, Marcus?
I didn't have one, but I'll come up with one on the fly. I think it's not really a bold prediction, but I just an observation. I think we're just going to continue to see a bit more chalk now in today's college basketball. So I think, there's real avenues for a lot of these teams that are like starting in the top 20 in KenPom this year to, for most of them to have a pretty good chance at making the Elite Eight. So I don't really see any crazy Cinderella runs, particularly this year, like the mid majors. There's not as great of mid majors in my opinion. That can really give these teams a run for their money. So that's just what I would say, at least kind of where we're trending for this season.
Cody, bold prediction?
Yeah, I would just echo that sentiment there, that we are going to see a lot more chalk than we have in past history, at least. Like I think last year was kind of just like foreshadowing what the rest of the tournament is going to look like. I mean, I don't want to see tournament expansion. Obviously, that might create a little bit more volatility there, but ultimately, and then one other thing that I'm interested in, I guess it's not really a bold prediction, is just to see how these high-profile European transfers actually turn out. And I think these guys, like a guy like Neoklis Abdalis or like Tyster Ritter and some of those other guys like Mahalo Petrovic, I think those guys are going to set the market for what these European players are going to look like in the future, what kind of money they're going to make, how many of them come over every year. Because if those guys, like if all of them hit or like 75% of them break out, we're going to see every coach start to do a lot of their recruiting over in Europe, and we're going to see a little more international flavor in college basketball.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to just throw in there, I would love to see, it's something I'd love to see. I'd love to see Louisville and BYU both go on pretty decent March Madness runs. I think both teams are going to be pretty fun to watch. I think it'd be pretty cool if they could both make like an Elite Eight to join those other 4 teams I had in my Final Four.
All right, we're going to wrap things up here. As always, thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.